So that's my Mastodon ID. As you can see, the little bird is flying dead. So I want to talk about my personal experiences as transformations, because I've been writing software professionally since 1969. So a lot of chances to sort of try to get things done. And by and large, it's been really successful. I did actually the first extreme programming project that was reported in Java. So most of XP prior to that point was in Smalltalk. I had a client that was working in Java, so we said, should this work in Java? And we thought it would, and sure enough, it did, and we had a very successful project. And have done successful deliveries using extreme programming and Agile techniques since then. But the downside of that is some of these transformations were not permanent. That some of the things you start doing and everybody was successful, by the time you sort of go back a few years later, it's like, it's all gone. Something happened there. So over time, I've sort of recognized that some of these things that we tried and worked really well, but trying to understand why they didn't work and what happened. And I've tried to use various mitigation strategies to try to sort of minimize that sort of snapback. You're never going to kill all of it off, but I'm trying to do some of that. So these are based on my experiences in particular. So I sort of say there's sabotage going on, and this is spy versus spy. If you're really of my generation, you recognize the icons. They've stopped publishing it a long time ago. This is the definition of sabotage, basically obstructing something for particular gains, for political or maybe military advantages. And I also kind of want to expand a little bit because I think there's unintentional sabotage as well. So I kind of broaden the definition to include that when I talk about how you sabotage a transformation. And I would say basically, in most of my environments, I am trying to transform an organization. They bring me in to make something happen differently. Officially now they call this the disruptor role. It's actually taught in business schools as one of the roles you have. It's what I tend to do. And I heard this number basically several years ago at 13%. And this is what McKinsey, a primary consulting group, basically says, Agile projects are that much better than waterfall by 13%. Which sounds like it's a reasonable gain, but actually when I look at the gains we get much better than that. I mean, Jeff Sutherland a few years ago at a conference basically said he gets at least 4x. This 13% must be nonsense. I don't know what they're doing. They're not using the Agile processes I'm talking about. And the numbers I tend to get out of my projects tend to be more the 4 to 6x range. And we always get really, really positive results from that. But again, it's not necessarily sticking. So what's the difference between the 13% guys and what we're getting done? What's going on there? And a key source of the stress that we create in this 4x environment is the speed at which we tend to work. And the speed at which we tend to work is sort of unusual in the organization. It actually breaks a lot of their processes and roles. And that seems to be the key source for the sort of the sources of sabotage, is that they're not accommodating the speed at which we can work in when this true Agile environment really gets going. So this is my favorite development cycle when I talk about this with various clients and when I actually execute this myself. I call this a tasking cycle, which basically says we start out by thinking about a task we want to work on, and we spend some time designing. And people say, well, you don't do design when you do Agile. It says, yes, we do. We try to find objects. We try to find their behaviors. We're trying to figure out how to make the system work. And then we write that test first. We try to write that assertion and make sure we understand the design. Because you can't write the assertion, you haven't finished your design process. And so we start a very, very aggressive feedback cycle. Then we write some code. Well, oh my goodness, the code is ugly. Okay, let's think about the design. That's feedback on our design process. We want to go through this cycle pretty quickly. And so over the years, I've asked various audiences, how long does it take to go around this cycle? And I cite some work I did in India where we had 1 million lines of code and we're making changes to the software and it's 50 people working on it. And they talk about, well, how long can you go around the cycle? And I hear numbers like 1 month, maybe 2 weeks. And in fact, actually, we were sort of going around about 2-hour cycles. We can go really fast around this cycle. And the nice thing is, every time you go around this cycle, if you wanted to, you can ship the code. Now, this is strange for the organization as well, because your organization is used to programmers telling them when I can get the software. And it's months in advance or whatever. There's a schedule out there, some timelines. But in this sort of working in this environment, it's always ready to ship. I go back to the business and say, if you want it, you can take it now. It's ready. You want to wait tomorrow, you get more functionality. You can do it tomorrow. You make the decision. And by and large, the organizations are not ready to make that decision. They're used to basically throwing over the wall to programmers, and programmers will tell me when I can get it, and of course I'm going to double the time because they never deliver it on time. But this is the world we sort of live in. And this speed pressure creates all sorts of consternation in the organization. It causes a lot of chaos associated with organization. And therefore, you begin to have people saying, I don't want to do it this way. We like the old way. We like sort of the way it used to work. So you wind up with having this sort of thing happen. So just how fast can you go in this environment? So this is from the Norwegian Welfare Association. I worked for them starting around 2019. Been working with them for about a year and a half. And they were actually quite intelligent. The Norwegian Welfare Association, by the way, handles all the social programs. Disability, retirement, sickness and accident, sick kids, all the sorts of things were one agency. And they tracked themselves about how often they're shipping new releases. So in 2018, they reported that these are various projects. So the most frequent project we're shipping was shipping about 135 times, going to production, and then it trails off from there. Then they showed the 2019 numbers. And these are the 2019 shipment numbers, sort of drawn to scale. The 3 projects with asterisks on it are the projects I was working on. They had built it by themselves. A continuous delivery system was very powerful, and I exploited it. So we literally were just constantly shipping many times a day into production systems. So this obviously creates a difference in the organization, how it tends to work, in order to get this sort of speed and process. By the way, the 2020 numbers are triple these numbers. So it kept going faster and faster. So they're doing extremely well in that space. So who doesn't like this environment? So I classify these sort of various saboteurs in several categories. These are the active saboteurs, the guys who know that's happening and want to try to stop this sort of stuff from happening at all. So there's one first category of these which I call are the individuals who are losing power. The people who are no longer that important anymore because of some things we're doing. So there's people that sort of have special knowledge and they want to hoard this knowledge that makes them important. You have to come to them and bow down and lay right there the Pope and kiss their ring and therefore get a permission to do something. I remember one of my earlier clients in ThoughtWorks actually, if the certain guy wasn't in town, we couldn't do deployments that week. If he was on holiday, we had to skip our deployment cycle that week because we had to kiss his ring. And he had unique knowledge and he was not sharing it. So these people that don't want to share their knowledge, they don't like this because we're in a high knowledge sharing environment. We're pair programming, we're rotating pairs, there's DevOps going on, there's all these other things that are happening. And so there's no sort of person that's so unique that he can't be replaced or replaced by a couple of other people. Then all of a sudden, of course, the most efficient communication when you're trying to go fast is communication you don't have to have. So if you can write front-end code and do some CSS as well as organize a database as well as write some back-end code, well, that communication you're having with yourself is much more efficient than having a meeting. And so again, full-stack developers become sort of key to the process if you want to go fast, to try to eliminate the handoffs between various groups. So obviously, full-stack developers threaten that sort of database czar, who again, unique knowledge, and you have to show me all your queries. If you can't review your queries, you can't run them on my system. You can't migrate my data unless I'm allowed you to migrate my data. And we sort of want to go around those guys. We get rid of those guys. And then there's sign-offs. There's an enormous number of sign-offs associated with these processes. And what typically happens is something goes wrong in a previous release. So how do we fix this? Well, we make sure we have somebody who's going to look for that problem the next time so it never happens again, regardless of how much that cost us in terms of time and delivery. And of course, more and more of those things happen. I remember when I started working for the Daily Mail in London, I came in as a role of chief architect. It was the title they had available that had the right pay associated with it, so I took the title. It wasn't actually the architect. And I was sitting in the CTO's office, and he comes by with a piece of paper, and he sort of signs off, and I say, yeah, what is that? He says, well, that's the sign-off for the next release. And I said, if that paper ever shows up on my desk, I'm just going to shred it. And let's see what happens. Let's see who gets upset. I never saw a piece of paper. So people who are responsible for signing off are slowing the process down, and we tend to eliminate those roles. Again, and I was working in London, a different job, where Sarah and I were originally working in particular. And basically, we grew to a certain size, a couple hundred, 100 or so people, and we brought another company of 100 and some people. And the first thing we noticed about that organization was the innovation wasn't flowing. And so we immediately decided the best thing to do is, first of all, clean out the whole CX executive ranks, because they were going to quit anyway, and find everybody whose job it was to approve something or make rules or enforce these rules, and we got rid of all those guys. They're gone, because they provide no value add. And all of a sudden, innovation starts flowing up. And in fact, innovation that first year after the acquisition, the additional profits pay for the acquisition. Just letting people innovate was all it took to sort of make money in that company. And it was being suppressed by people signing things off. So get rid of those guys. So those guys don't like it when I come in and sort of do some things. They're active saboteurs of this sort of thing. All right, who else happened? It's process impedance mismatches. Processes run at different speeds. I'm trying to run at cycles that run in a few hours. I ship many times a day. Well, there are other parts of the organization that that's not how we work. In particular, you see people like UX and UI guys. And they've sort of been trained to go study the client, let's have a study, let's have some focus groups, let's go study them, let's draw some really pixel-perfect screens, let's try these out with some scenarios. All right, now I can tell you what to write. Months and months and months pass, unpredictable amount of time. I can't tolerate that in this cycle. And so those sort of guys get upset. Database architects. It says, I'm the only one allowed to set a table. I have to set your tables up. I have to see your queries before you can run them. I have to make sure they run successfully. This is going to take me 4 or 5 days to do this. Can't wait for you. So they don't like this sort of transformation. Architecture boards. Somebody wants to sign off on our philosophy. Well, it's strange. I use a lot of strange architectures, because they're sort of appropriate for the problems we're trying to solve. And these guys have never seen a microservice architecture or an event bus. They're still thinking that everything's a Fortran program and it runs on a batch process. And because usually these architecture boards are people who are my age that haven't written code in the last 30 years. And 30 years ago, this was a good idea to make these sort of decisions. They have no idea what it looks like today. So they don't like this. And there's lots of other approval processes you run across. So there's a process mismatch between our speed and the speed these guys have traditionally worked at. That creates, again, saboteurs. Jealousy of success. The worst thing that can happen in one of these things, as far as they're concerned, is, oh my goodness, we tried this strange thing and it worked. And we delivered something incredibly fast. And that just can't happen. That must be something wrong. And so you hear all these sort of things, and typically they're passive aggressive about this. Well, this really worked only for this sort of project. It wouldn't work for our stuff. We have real things we have to do. It can't work for your process. Of course it can. You also have what I call the reverse Hawthorne effect. Hawthorne effect, of course, is the idea that comes from Hawthorne, New York, where they ran some experiments in the 30s. And they basically had some workers working in sort of very menial tasks. And they said, well, I bet if we make it a little lighter in here, they'll work faster. And they did. They turned the lights up and they worked faster. And they turned them up again, they worked faster. It's like, wow, this is really cool. So they said, let's try just turning them back down. Then they worked even faster. And it turned out the reason it worked that way is you were paying attention to them. They were special. We're trying something with you. You must be special. Well, the problem is all the other people that aren't special are feeling the pressure. Why aren't we special? What's wrong with us? Those have become sort of, again, saboteurs of what you're working on. Oh yeah, I didn't get to work on your really cool project, so I bet it's really not very cool after all. And you sort of talk about it that way. So you have that reverse Hawthorne effect of jealousy of success. Well, how do you mitigate that sort of active saboteur? And one of the most interesting ways actually came from the founder of ThoughtWorks, Roy Singham, who quoted Stalin. And who quotes Stalin? Well, this was the first time I'd ever heard Stalin was quoted. And one of the things Stalin would say is, if you and I disagree, if you and I are sort of completely disagree with each other, I'm not going to argue with you because I'm never going to convince you. All we're going to do is make noise. I'm going to get everybody else and tell them why you're stupid. And when they agree with me, we'll shoot you. This is the Stalin approach. And so if somebody comes in and wants to argue with me about something, and once I sort of talk about it, it's like I'm never going to convince them. They're never going to change their mind. I stop talking to them. And I just talk to everybody else. You sort of ignore them. And you also have this sort of side effect that actually I found really interesting. This comes from Mass Effect 2. This is Grunt. And Grunt basically said, the greatest insult to an enemy is to ignore him. And if somebody wants to fight with you about a topic, if you're really upset with you, and you just ignore them, they get really irritated, which makes me feel even better. So just ignore them. Don't power. They're going to yell and scream. They look more and more unreasonable the more they yell and scream, and eventually they will go away. So that turns out to work really well. So I've decided I just don't argue with people I will never convince. I would just instead spend my time with people who will listen to and have some reasonable opinions about this stuff. So that's one of my strategies. The second strategy I call the sandwich strategy. And this evolved out of one of my early projects at ThoughtWorks as well. We did some work for an insurance company. We delivered a system that they were practically stunned we were able to deliver the system in the time they needed. In fact, there was great doubt that it would ever be delivered. And even the architects basically said after the project, says, we thought you had no chance of doing this, and we pulled it off. And then we got no more work from that client. And you're like, what happened? I mean, I was mystified by this. It took me many years to sort of begin to understand it. It says whoever brought us in because they were desperate. They had spent most of their money, weren't getting anything for it. And so they brought us in as sort of a rescue project. And because we were in a sort of desperate situation, we get to pick our rules. We can work the way we want to. We can do all sorts of strange things like pair programming and TDD and holding stand-ups and all sorts of other crazy things because they're desperate. What choice do they have? But when we're successful, the manager is not going to go up to who sponsored us, and not going to go up to the CTO and say, oh, by the way, I was completely screwing up and these guys saved us. No, he's going to pat us on the back as soon as out the door and go say, wow, I was so successful. He doesn't want to bring us back because then the truth would come out and what really happened. And so you wind up with this, what I call the sandwich strategy, which basically says you want to go back and talk to that C-level executive, the guy who's paying the bill for this project. You want to go talk to him and tell him what's going to be happening. Don't talk about TDD and pair programming. Talk about we're changing the pace of software development. We're changing our ability to react to situations. We're making social changes to the organization. These guys are smart. They understand what you're trying to talk about. They understand also that this is what they want to have happen. Nobody's ever been able to show them how they can make it happen. And they're more than happy to support your efforts. So you get them on board. Then you go down with the troops and tell them about what you want to do. Of course, to the troop level, this stuff is fun. I mean, writing code every day, pushing code to production, instead of going to meetings all day long or debating UML diagrams, we're writing code all the time. We're doing what we want to get paid to do, write programs. So you get these guys really happy. So what happens is there's middle guys in the middle. And Kent Beck talks a lot about various ways to convince the guys in the middle that Agile is a good idea. We always fail. Because these guys are fundamentally risk averse. They're in very comfortable jobs, they're doing sign-offs, they're doing all sorts of other things that we're sort of looking at. And when he sees us doing this really crazy stuff down here at the troop level, he's going to go run up to this guy and say, wow, do you know what these guys are doing? They're doing this crazy pair programming, and the executive says, yeah, it's really cool, isn't it? And he says, oh, yeah, I guess it is really cool, and he goes and hides back in his desk. They're risk averse. And if the CTO likes it, then, of course, we like it too. They get out of your way. But you'll never convince them otherwise. You've got to go find that champion at the top level. And now with my engagements, if I don't have that conversation with the guy in yellow, I won't start the engagement. Because I know anything I'm going to change, anything I'm trying to transform will eventually fail because little red guys are going to run up there and tell him what he's doing, and it'll go away but as soon as I walk out the door. So the sandwich strategy, make sure you have that sponsoring executive, the guy who's paying the bill. Don't worry about who's officially in charge, whose money are you spending. Go find that guy, have that conversation with him, make sure he's on board with what we're doing. I went to another client actually in one of the other large retailers in London, was talking to the CTO and the VP of development. And I described some of the things that was going to happen and some of the things I was trying to do with his teams and whatever. And apparently, as soon as we walked out the door, I heard later that the VP of development said, there's no way in hell I'm going to let that guy in my door. And I was perfectly happy with that answer. Because if he didn't want me there, I was not going to be successful. The transformation wouldn't happen. I was perfectly happy to walk away from that client. So we never got an engagement with those guys. All right, that's the sandwich strategy. The other thing you can do is you can sort of subvert the subversion. So if somebody's trying to sabotage your efforts, sabotage the saboteur. So I guess this is a case where I was working in India. We had a senior programmer, Indian senior programmer they had hired. The site was very proud of hiring a senior programmer. The senior programmer, though, had a lot of junior programmers. And of course, he's in charge of making them productive. I mean, we're an Agile shop. We're supposed to be pair programming and TDD and all this stuff. And he was like, nah, you guys need to learn on your own. I went through the pain, you need to go through the same pain. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Your job is responsible for all of it. No, I own my piece, they own their piece. That's the way it works. Again, Stalin time, right? So I was like, okay, well, let me do the following. So I got one of my colleagues from the US, brought him over to India, one of the best programmers I've ever worked with, just sent him out at the table. Of course, he's pairing with people, they're asking him questions, he's helping him do things. The team lead's over there looking more and more upset because these people are getting productive and they're learning from this stuff, and they're listening to this guy, they're ignoring him. What's the power? He eventually quit, which was great. The only thing we regretted was we should have fired him. They were great afterwards. We should have got rid of him. But you can basically bring somebody else in without the title. The power will flow naturally to people who are working well with others. Power is not something you can imbue with a title. Power is something the team gives you. And you put the wrong person in charge and the power is flowing somewhere else, discord will occur. So in this case, we just sabotaged the saboteur, and it worked out quite well. The team got very productive as soon as he left. Finally, you have to worry about the change agent themselves. The guy coming in here and creating the chaos, which is usually the sort of things I'm doing. So Womack and Jones talks about lean processes, and they're talking about more manufacturing. But one of their footnotes in one of the chapters is, you have to be a tyrant to get these changes done, but tyrants are always shot. So as benevolent as you want to be as a tyrant, you are a tyrant. And fundamentally, when I come into an organization, I am a tyrant. I'm saying we're going to do it this way, we're going to do pair programming, we won't check any code in unless it's run by a pair. We're not going to do reviews anymore because that's a waste of time. We're going to have pair programming. Again, lots of people get upset. So what happens in this dynamic, again, as far as a change agent coming in, again, you have that conversation with the C-level executive very early in the process. So you get him lined up, sandwich strategy. And then basically you go join the team and actually start the work. And you start bringing the processes into the team. And you do that personally. And so over time, some of the team begins to subscribe to your ideas, but there's a few guys that are like a little reluctant, and there's always a guy out there saying, this is really crazy. I don't really believe in this, but he's kind of like, trying to keep quiet. But the longer you stay there, the less quiet he becomes. And sort of a counterculture starts forming. And so now he's really, really against it. He's beginning to turn a few of the other people against the process. We don't really need to do pairing all the time, do we? We don't really need to write tests all the time. That's really nonsense. But what happens is, if you walk out the door, he loses all the power. You become the lightning rod for the counterculture. What are we going to do to kill Fred? Let's talk about how we can do that. And it's like, what? I walked out the door. Oh my goodness, the whole thing falls apart because I don't have anybody yelling anymore. And the rest of the team's really happy with this. So generally those people kind of leave the team. We're perfectly happy with that. And sort of the rest of the people sort of follow along. So it's important for the change agent to be a relatively short-term employee in terms of that, engagement with the team, because he will become a lightning rod for a counterculture for the people that are trying to sabotage it. And just getting rid of the personality is actually quite powerful. So yeah, you got to kill the change agent. All right, that's sort of the active personal saboteurs into the system, but you have some organizational sabotage going on as well. And this is sometimes more a cultural aspect as well. So for example, you have what I call success conservatism. So it's one of my favorite new terms for this situation. Because one of the things I like to do is I like to build a high-performing team. But then you want to keep bringing people in, add them into the team, and then start spawning off other teams. Because we understand the process, we understand how to do that. We can share the knowledge. And the most powerful knowledge sharing is by moving the people. Not build a wiki, not put a Scrum Master in place, take the people and start something else. So I was working in Norway, I had a really powerful team. I had a lot of alpha personalities. And so I didn't need all those alphas. And so basically I took a couple of guys that understood it best, and I spun them off, kicked them out of the room, so to speak, spun them off into their own project. And it turns out that when COVID hit, and they were working on an aspect of that, when COVID hit, we needed to go into our basically unemployment system and start cutting checks. We're used to cutting maybe 100 unemployment claims a day, and now we're getting thousands a day. And the claim workers can't keep up. We found a nice loophole in the law, and we just wanted to start cutting checks because we wanted to sort of support these families in this crisis. So these couple guys I spawned off, another one or two joined them. They actually got together, they wrote some code. 4 days later, they got a system that will support that. 4 days later. Massive success, just by spawning off a team. That's the last team we spawned off. Because after that point in time, oh no, you can't touch these people. They're valuable to the project. I've invested in them. I need them to make sure I make my schedules. But look what happened when we spun some guys off. There was amazing side effects. That's not my problem. My problem is getting my code out the door. We're not going to spawn any more teams. I call that success conservatism, because as soon as you're successful, it's like, don't touch it. But I can improve it again. No, don't touch it. Again, a waste of a process. So you have to sort of, again, fight that. And again, I'm fighting that more aggressively now with CTOs. I coach on various things, that they do want to move the people around aggressively. You want to be able to do that. So that's success conservatism. Titles. I hate titles. Titles almost, when you look at a business card and it says, oh, I'm a senior Java programmer, it's like, okay, well, that assumes you can't do anything else, because that's what your title says. If you're a manager, oh my goodness, you can't think anymore. It must be because you're a manager title. But whatever's on your business card basically says what people you can't do. And that's really not true in most cases. You can do many other things. And so it turns out titles constrain yourself. And most titles are actually written in their contracts around a waterfall process, because that process has been around a long time, and they're still using those same silly titles. So that forces you to have the handoffs, because I got to go from the front-end guy to the back-end guy, got to get the database guy involved, then we got to go to the QA group, get some sign-offs from various architecture boards. These titles get in the way. So they also kind of inhibit the use of full-stack developers. If I'm a front-end developer and I understand how to write Java code for the back-end, you're not allowed to do that. Your job is front-end. But I know how to do that. I'm sorry, you're not allowed to do that. That's a back-end job. Worry about your job first. So you discourage even the creation of full-stack developers. So I ran across this situation when I was working in London for one of the big media companies, doing online newspapers. We had 50 people in the IT team, various different roles. I actually literally counted 25 different titles for the 50 people. And when you actually added it up, there was actually 0 people that understand what we're trying to accomplish. Nobody had the big picture, 0. The poor Scrum Master was standing in front of the group at the beginning of stand-ups, trying to piece together the front end, the back end, the database, to see if she's making progress. And she wasn't capable of understanding that either. So this is the environment you're walking into. So clearly they were just too over-specialized. In an environment where reaction time is important, I need to build the full-stack developers. So the way we did that, we decided we'd just fix the titles. So first of all, we sort of defined what a competence model was. So I use a 3-tier competence model. I don't care if it's 3 levels, 5 levels, 4 levels, I could care less. And we defined key technologies that we thought were important. And we began to rate our people on these technologies relative to the scale. And again, if you're a master in a technology, we are putting you in charge of figuring out who the journeymen are or who the apprentices. In other words, you can figure out what those are because you're a master. And we picked some technologies we thought were important to us. This was the initial list. I didn't necessarily like all the things on the list, but I could kill some of them. The CTO wouldn't let me do that. But we began to classify people on this. And then we decided new titles. We decided we build titles based on competence. So you're called a developer if you're competent in one of our key technologies. In other words, you could be productive in that technology all day long without a lot of supervision. That would work really well for you. If you couldn't, you're called a graduate developer, which means I'm not sure we hired you if you couldn't do anything, but you're a graduate developer. And of course, senior developers were what we call the masters, the guys who are really good at this stuff. And then we got a little more creative. We said there's also going to be something we're going to now call a system developer. He's competent in 5 to 7 key technologies. Not a wizard, just competent. And by the way, we'll pay you the same we paid the experts. So there's motivation here to become a full-stack developer, if that's your inclination. We also created something called a master developer, which was basically you're a wizard in several different technologies. Didn't have any of those, but it's somewhere you can aspire to. And then we basically gave you a choice. Do you want to become more of the wizards, or do you want to become more a full-stack developer? You get to choose your path. And we put everybody through some training in terms of writing code a certain way and pair programming and various agile practices, and then let them decide. So we weren't forcing the choice on anyone. But we gave them that choice. And we said, by the way, if you want to work on the new projects, these are going to be your titles. If you don't want to change your title, I have lots of legacy code. You can spend a lot of time on that. If you want to be the database, the chief Java programmer, I got a lot of Java code back there. It's going to be there for 25 years. Don't worry about your job. You got a job working on that. But the new stuff, these are your titles. Take your pick. Most people chose to take the new titles. Now, interestingly, I went to HR, and this is a company that's 135 years old. went to HR and said, I want to change the titles for everybody. And you're expecting a sort of, what's their reaction to that going to be? They loved it. They loved it. They don't want to be in this business of figuring out whether you're a senior Java technical lead or whatever. They've been, all those people coming in there, I should be a senior Java technical lead. I check off all the boxes. Why I'm going to get promoted. They don't want that conversation. The programmers were deciding what you were in this system. We were making the choices about that. And they were like, fine, I don't want to make those choices. You guys can make that choices. So I got no reaction, no feedback, or no negative feedback from Human Resources of a 135-year-old company run by Lord Rothermere. So that's actually fixing the titles. The other thing that's very important to do to sort of kill the organization stuff is where people sit turns out to be really important, especially in trying to build projects across multiple disciplines. So typically what we do is we sit all the departments together because that's what we do. And of course, we have to, in certain countries, and England is one of those, you have to have a certain amount of space allocated for everybody to sit in. You can't put them too tight together because that's sort of against the rules. And so you have to have space for employees. And we're trying to actually sit people closer together that are working together. And I got these rules that say it doesn't want to happen that way. So it turns out you have to mitigate the seating as well. It turns out seating is very, very important to making high-performing teams. So basically, you don't want to sit the departments together. Because basically, there's three reasons people talk to each other. The first reason is, we have the same hobbies. So we support the same football team, our kids go to the same daycare, whatever it happens to be. And as a company, we have no control over that, really. The other is people will talk together if they have the same manager. So when you sit people together with the same manager, you're actually blowing the last capability, which was from Tom Allen at Sloan School at MIT. He says, the chance of you and I communicating varies inversely with the square of distances between our chairs. So if you and I were sitting this close together, and we double the distance, only one chance of 4 of us talking. Double the distance again, one chance of 16. He measured the intellectual distance of going down a staircase to talk to somebody. It's 100 meters. Square that number. You might as well be in New Zealand. You're not going to talk to them. They're downstairs. Same thing for an elevator. You're not going to get in the elevator to go see these people. It turns out the only thing that's actually linear is an escalator. An escalator sort of is not an intellectual barrier. I just can sit there, I can see where I'm going, I don't have to wait for anything, I don't have to use my legs. It's really a lazy way of doing that. So it turns out intellectually escalators don't have this problem, which is why you see them in the malls. A shopping mall has to have an escalator, or you just will not go to the second floor. You will never shop up there. It's horrible equipment, it breaks down all the time, it's expensive, it takes a lot of space, and you gotta have it, otherwise they won't go. So that's the thing. So look where people sit. They put everybody together, right? There's the department, they sit together. Here's another department, they sit together. You wonder why they point fingers at each other. Look how far apart they are. There's a staircase between them. They're not going to talk to each other. Those other guys are idiots upstairs. By the way, of course, where does the CEO sit? The corner office is the top floor. He has maximized the distance between him and everybody else in the building. You wonder why he's clueless? Well, look where he's sitting. This is just nonsense. Yeah, so that's the where you sit. So it turns out sitting people together is key. So one of the things is I will sit people together. We'll drag ourselves into the same room. We'll call it a meeting. We just meet for all day for many, many days in a row. It turns out Zoom rooms are actually pretty good for this because everybody's sort of equidistant from each other. It's easy to reach out. There are some problems because I just can't look up and look around and say, oh, you must be stuck. But if we're sitting together, I can sort of see when people are stuck. So it's not quite as effective, but it's not bad for this. It sort of eliminates that sort of square of the distances. I can see everybody when I need to see them. So it turns out where you sit tends to be a big mitigating factor for making you go faster. When I worked in one of my early ThoughtWorks projects, we got a conference room from the VP because we said we're going to deliver this project for half the price of the other guys. He said, fine. We need a space to work in. Fine. Here's my conference room. We're going to put all sorts of pins and stuff on the wall. That's okay. I can always paint the wall again. Do whatever you need to do. So you're going to get the code out the door. And we basically tore up the wall with push pins. Yes. But we got it out the door. We were sitting together. We even had to sort of drag the business analysts to sit near us as well. It's like, oh my goodness, we can't sit here. Where's our phone? Where's our pictures? Of course, by the time the project ended, we had to go back to their desk. Tears were shed. We're breaking up the family. Oh my goodness, this is a group that was worked together. We solved a problem together. Again, very powerful feedback about where you sit. So the other thing is you got to go find, the people that permissions are required. You got to get rid of those permissions. Review boards need to go away. Architects, if you're an architect and you want to understand what we're doing, come sit with us and write some code with us. Help us understand what the right architecture is. I had some people come into a group one time and says, well, I'm your web service compliance architect. I need to see your web service compliance plan. I said, come here and write it with us. Oh, I don't do that. Fine, there's the door. If he wants to go yell, let's go find the executive. I already got the executive lined up behind it. He's not going to win this argument. Occasionally, they try to drag me in front of the executive. They lose, and they go away again because they're risk averse. So you see things like review boards, standards bodies. We've always done it this way. When you hear these sorts of things, it's like, no, not anymore. These are the things that are signs that we're having sabotage from the organization. And you got to go figure out how to do that. You tend to, sometimes organizations, you'll see me sort of hate the concept of Scrum Masters and things like that. It's safe and those other things that my colleagues talk about as well. Bad ideas. And sometimes it's very enticing for an organization to say, well, I can either invest in training all my people to use these processes, or I can hire the Scrum Master. I'm going to hire the Scrum Master because that looks easier. And I can just add him into the team. I don't have to touch you guys. You guys still have your milestones and whatever. Again, a really bad idea. So instead of hiring, they want to hire this process expert over sort of empowering the people. And I'm sitting with a team, we're trying to do our work, and these sort of people trying to tell us how to do our work. It's like, go away. So almost all my projects where there's Scrum Masters, they immediately leave as soon as I show up. If they don't leave on their own, I will kick them out pretty quickly. We don't need them. Scrum Masters particularly are there to enforce the process. What I've discovered as I've worked through this stuff is the process is in place to change behavior of the programmers. And as soon as the programmers behave differently, I don't need the process anymore. Well, Scrum Master, of course, wants the process there all the time. That's his job security. So what's the purpose of a stand-up? Well, my stand-ups, you stand up and basically say, what did you finish yesterday? Well, I'm working on this. I mean, you're not finished, right? Well, yeah, I'm not finished, but I'm working on it. No, you're not finished. I'm looking for finished things. If my cycles are 2 to 4 hours at most, usually less than that, you should have finished something yesterday. If you're not, you're stuck. I don't want to hear about being stuck. Now, of course, you don't want to stand up in front of the group and say, I'm stuck. So what do you do instead? Well, when I get stuck yesterday, I'm going to ask for help yesterday. As soon as people start doing that, I don't need to stand up anymore. The process has served its purpose. And so almost all of the Agile processes are actually to change behavior of programmers. And once the behavior change is in place, I don't need the process anymore. Now, typically it will take a year or so to sort of get to this point with most organizations, but processes should sort of wean away over time. Well, that's those experts. I have a lot of clients that have a lot of third-party contractors coming in. And it's like, oh my goodness, we don't want to invest in training contractors. They should already know this stuff. I'm sorry, they don't know this stuff. Yet you still want to work on your teams without knowing this stuff. This is silly. I did work with one of the big manufacturing firms in Detroit, and they basically understood that, we have to invest in our contractors because they're people that are delivering our software. And so they were okay with that. Most companies will at least let the contractors attend the classes I try to teach and work through some of the issues like that with me, but they just don't get paid for them being a contractor that day. So you usually get at least that deal done. But you got to invest in the contractors. You got to make sure they understand the process as well, especially using third-party workforces. All right, and there's some other types of sabotage that come up, as you can possibly imagine. Some of these are examples of cultural sabotage. This is not the way we do work. I'm a consensus culture. Everybody has to agree, or else we get in trouble. You also have indirect sabotage. And one of the things I've used is a mitigation strategy now and been playing with this for the last couple of years. Actually, I talked about this almost, it's been 15 years ago when I was in ThoughtWorks, tried to get this model in place. Not successful. But I call it a pod, which says, let's take a group of people that know how to work together and drop them into an organization to affect that change. Because they're coming in there with a set of skills to make those transformations at each level necessary. So we call them pods. When I'm working in Norway, I work through this company, Cynthia, which has as its mission to enhance the software delivery capabilities of our clients. We're trying to make them better at doing software. Not trying to stay there forever, not trying to write all the software for them. We're trying to make them better. And that's what I like doing. So a pod. So a pod basically means I got the skills to sort of walk in there, understand what type of problem you're trying to solve, understand, talk to the executives about the transformation that's going to happen at the appropriate levels, put an application architecture appropriate for that particular problem, look at what needs to be trained in terms of bringing the skill set up, provide that technical leadership early so that we're showing them how to do this personally, not just sitting back as a Scrum Master saying you should hold a stand-up. You need to have a retrospective. Where's your estimates? Instead of doing that, we're in there actually doing it with them. So we're providing that technical leadership, particularly around going fast and keeping their focus on the problem we're trying to solve today, not every other problem. Let's solve this problem today and get it done. We do the Agile process tuning as necessary, and we give some metrics so that you can show progress. My favorite metric is continuous flow diagrams. We steal from the manufacturing side. It shows how we're making progress, what the rate of our change is. But we're also expecting the client to add skills of their own. So this is a co-sourcing sort of situation because the client has domain expertise. We don't. We need their expertise. We need their understand how they do deployments in their environment because there's always some secret sauce to doing deployments everywhere. Any sort of compliance understanding they have relative to their industry or relative to their personal standards. And we need developers to teach so that they pick up these skills and we can sort of do our thing, play our role as sort of change agents and then exit appropriately. So we're not trying to stay there forever either. So we want to bring those skills together. So initially we try to focus on that first period of time. This first sort of 5 weeks we want to sort of orchestrate very carefully what that first 5 weeks like. Because we're trying to change behaviors at that. And it involves all of these sort of dimensions we just talked about. So we did this with a company called Earn Software. Earn is actually Norwegian for eagle, so you can read eagle software there. They're in the business of basically automating buildings, all sorts of things with buildings, whether it's air conditioning, electric bills, cutting up spaces for vendors to come in and rent spaces and the like, signing contracts, getting deposits made, almost everything associated with leasing business. So basically we put one of these studies together. We're going to do an 8-week engagement, which was the 5-week core thing, and then 3 weeks more because it wasn't quite July yet, and they go on holiday in July. I had a lot of conversations with executives for almost 6 months before we started this engagement. So they were on board. They felt comfortable with some of the crazy things I talked about. Well, I wouldn't say comfortable. They were kind of okay, let me try it. But at least they understood what was going to happen. And I actually gave process presentations to the overall organization itself. So they understood a little bit what was coming. So if we had massive objections, we'd hear about them before I show up. We want to make sure we get all those naysayers out of the way or whatever. We helped them pick the initial participants because we wanted to spread this through the culture very quickly. So we picked more or less team leads and other sort of leadership programmers into the group. And we picked 2 different projects that were radically different just to show that it works for 2 types of projects within the organization. Again, try to make sure we stamp down the people that said, oh, but it wouldn't work for my type of project. We had 2 good project endpoints there. We also had to go up to the board to get approval for this, which is really great because now if somebody wants to say, I don't want to do this anymore, I say, go talk to the board. You convince them it's a bad idea. We have massive approval at the top level of the business about making this happen. So nobody's going to get in my way when I have board approval to start with. So that was really a good setup for the success and a key to that. So the timeline basically was, again, the 8-week timeline. The first 5 weeks were, again, fixed price. In other words, we're going to provide these sort of services to you. We're not sure what you really need, but we'll accommodate it within the budget we've allocated for that 5 weeks. We trained, in this case, trained the developers. We created stories for their behalf. We instantiated their first sort of card wall, so to speak, the metrics associated with that. Gave it application architecture and did some readiness assessments during the process to see if they're ready to pick it up. All that was included in that price. Then the extra 3 weeks, because between us and the July date was time and materials, I'd like to have had that fixed price as well. But again, we're just doing more application stuff, more stories, more metrics, again, reinforcing the process. So that was the timeline we laid out for the business for that 8 weeks. So we started out with training for that first week, 10 developers and some of my colleagues from Cynthia as well to make sure they understood what I was talking about. It took 6 days. Again, they had some really nicely skilled programmers. Everybody kind of wanted to be there, at least in theory. And we had pair programming, we taught pair programming, TDD, tasking cycle, all the things we just talked about was instilled with them in that workshop. Microservices turned out to be the right architecture, so I ran a workshop on that as well and added that in there. So we had a briefing from the client about this is what my business is. That was happening at the beginning of week 1. We actually started writing stories around that time. At that point, we'd been through the training, we put some other work together. And then after that point, we actually started writing the real code for the real system. And actually, at this point, we actually got around, I think we rolled out something around week 5. We actually were able to show the client, this is how it works. That included building a whole new framework associated with microservices in C#, which was their language of choice. We did that in the first week, had that framework built, used it, wrote the story, started the card wall, started the stand-ups. That process was instantiated and ran nicely. So it turned out I went back and reviewed this project in September, and they're doing everything we talked about. It's still working and still sticking. So I was feeling pretty good about that one. We also actually started the second project at this point in time. We broke the team up into 2 groups. I got the briefing on what the domain was about that time. Again, same sort of development, started with mob programming, put the framework together in a few days, 4 days, built a new framework for them, different type of domain. Again, put everything in place, stories and Trello and the like. Went back later in September, they're working very fine as well. We also had some more experiments we were running. We say, what if you are not part of the training, where you don't see the training? Can you absorb it from your colleagues? So we injected some more programmers at that point in time. They picked it up very quickly. Within a few days, they were competent in the technologies, they were competent in choices. The process wasn't that alien to them, which means I can grow a team very quickly, dynamically. Which means I can also take the team away and this doesn't stop working. It just works slower because I have fewer people. It works in this environment. So again, we proved that it worked. I had 2 more developers at this point, including my UX guys. Challenge associated with UX, obviously, is they want to see everything up front. We don't know what everything's going to happen yet, so we injected those guys as well. So those were sort of again, pods worked really well in that environment. I'm pushing really hard to make sure that's sort of the environment I'm always dropped into now. I want to come in and make sure we have that breadth of things covered in the executives as well. Other mitigation techniques I like to use, the word experiment, I think it was, who talked about this? It wasn't Dave Thomas. It must have been Dave Farley talked about this, I think, in his presentation. Experiment's a very powerful word. Use it a lot. Because when you say I want to try an experiment, you're saying it's not going to be forever. I just want to try this idea out. Trying to convince somebody you want to do something forever. I want to do pair programming forever. It's like, oh my goodness, we're going to have a revolution. I want to try pair programming for a couple of weeks. If you argue against me, you're going to look really unreasonable. You don't even want to try it? Seriously? You don't have to participate, but maybe I'm going to try it with some other people. Oh, you're not allowed to try with other people. What do you mean? That sounds very unreasonable. Experiment's a very powerful word. It also implies you may fail. So failure is kind of possible failure is baked into that. So I love to use the word experiment. In fact, every retrospective I hold, we're going to try some new experiment for the next period. I want a new experiment. It could be small, it could be large, I don't care, but I want a new experiment to try every iteration. You got to have continuous executive involvement. Executives are sort of have the time sense and sort of they remember things about well as gnats remember things. They have very little sort of attention span. If you're not sort of in their face all the time, they forget about you because they got other things they're going to worry about. You got to keep them constantly involved. Hopefully showing good things, but even showing when you have problems. You got to keep them involved because that's your safety net. When those guys come up and yell about what you're doing, you want that executive to still be on board. You got to find the fear. There's a lot of sources of fear. Estimates are one of those. And you basically got to kill the fear. And that's probably the number one thing I wind up doing in most organizations, is going in there and trying to find the sources of fear and killing it. Then innovation starts flowing. Get rid of those guys that have to sign things off. Innovation occurs because the fear is now gone that they're not getting approved. And you got to basically be careful what you tell the team. Businesses are under constant chaotic stress. If you sort of let that leak into your development team, it's like, oh my goodness, you're going to change your mind about this. You're going to change your mind about this. No, I'm not going to change my mind about that. There's always what we call in IBM the plan of record. This is what we're working on. This is what we're going to be focused on. Focus on doing that. So to some degree, you want to shield them from all that other chaos going on outside, sort of in order to make sure that they just get caught up in that mess as well. And you need to practice what I call Agile schizophrenia. There's a whole other presentation on that you can find online. But it basically means if every team is doing Agile the same way, you're not Agile. Every team has a different problem, a different pace, different experiences. You need to constantly tune Agile to the team and how it's working. I call it Agile schizophrenia for an organization. Reference people. Frankly, you can put all the white papers out you want to, you can put all the presentations together you want to. You won't convince any executive unless he talks to another executive that's been doing this. A developer doesn't believe unless they talk to another developer who's been through it. Turn them into your advocates. Don't try to do this on your own. So that's I don't have time for questions, sorry, but I'll be around drinking with the rest of you guys. So come find me if you want to. And that's the story about sabotaging and transformation. Thank you.